I kept a drawer full of rejected wedding silk in the back room of my studio, which sounds more dramatic than it was, because most of the fabric had not been rejected for love, betrayal, or any useful poetic reason, but for practical disasters like rain stains, careless champagne, and one grandmother who had insisted that a crimson norige looked vulgar on a daughter-in-law who already spoke too loudly. My name is Seo Min-jae. I was 30 years old, and I earned my living restoring old clothes for people who often cared more about photographs than history. I told myself that was fine. Photographs paid rent. History only left lint on my sleeves and dust in the corners of my throat. My studio sat on the second floor of a narrow building in Ikseon-dong, above a shop that sold walnut cakes and below an office where two young architects argued about concrete as if it had insulted their mothers. Every morning I unlocked my door at 8, opened the window even in winter for 3 minutes because my late mother believed trapped air made people sad, and checked the humidity meter before I made tea. I knew how to coax torn silk into behaving again, how to clean sweat from a collar without bruising the dye, and how to speak gently to customers who brought in a grandmother's handbook and pretended not to care when their hands shook. I was less talented at speaking gently to debt collectors, landlords, and men who described Omega independence as an admirable hobby, but no one can be good at everything. By the spring that changed my life, my finances had become a kind of badly sewn hem, tidy from a distance, fraying underneath. My father had died 3 years earlier after a long illness, leaving behind medical bills, a small life insurance payout that disappeared before I learned to hold it, and a debt he had taken from a private lender to keep my younger sister in school. Nari was 22, stubborn, brilliant, and in her final year of law studies at Korea University. She called me Hyung only when she wanted money, advice, or both. The rest of the time, she called me Min-jae, as if the two of us were equal adults, which was technically true and emotionally insulting. I had promised her she would finish school. It was one of those promises people make beside hospital beds, because there are tubes and beeping machines, and grief has no practical sense. I had meant it, and because I had meant it, I spent the next years stretching each month like old elastic. I took restoration jobs I should have refused. I repaired theater costumes overnight. I ate convenience store triangle kimbap over ledgers with my glasses sliding down my nose. When Nari asked whether she should take a semester off, I lied so smoothly that I frightened myself. Nari once accused me of making bankruptcy sound like a weather forecast, and I told her the forecast was cloudy with a chance of private lenders. She did not laugh until I mentioned the landlord had extended our lease because I had repaired his wife's mother's jacket for a humiliating discount. Even then, her smile arrived with worry behind it, the way light comes through thin curtains. She said I was allowed to need help too. I said I knew, and both of us understood that knowing a thing and being able to afford it were separate professions. She laughed despite herself, and that was worth the missing payment. I lived for those small victories then. Nari laughing, a customer crying because her grandmother's sleeves looked whole again, my friend Jang Hye-rin bringing me tangerines from her mother's market stall and declaring them medicinal because they were free. Hye-rin rented the small back corner of my studio 3 days a week to paint custom shoes and restore old leather bags. She was an alpha with a laugh bigger than the room and a talent for making rich women confess their marital disappointments while she repaired the strap on a handbag. She said, I had the face of a man who understood secrets and the posture of a man who carried groceries he had not paid for yet. Her life looked easier than mine until you listened for more than 10 minutes. Her mother had early kidney disease and refused to slow down at the market. Hye-rin had been offered a place in a municipal arts residency in Busan, 6 months with a stipend and studio space, the kind of opportunity she had wanted since university. She had not accepted because her mother needed help lifting boxes at dawn, and because guilt, unlike rent, never arrived on paper. "At least your disaster is romantic," she told me the day the invitation arrived. I held up the cream envelope and stared at the gold lettering. A foundation gala is not romantic. It is a room where people pretend charity tastes better in expensive wine. You are being honored. My stitching is being displayed behind glass for people who will call it cultural heritage and then ask if I can repair their golf gloves. "Still," she said, leaning over my shoulder, "the Seonghwa Cultural Foundation, that is not small." No, it was not small. The Seonghwa Cultural Foundation owned half the historical properties that still had roofs in central Seoul, sponsored exhibitions, funded restorations, and laundered reputation with such elegance that even people who knew better clapped at their donor events. Everyone in my line of work knew the Seonghwa name. Everyone in Seoul knew the Han family behind it. Officially, they were investors, hoteliers, importers, and patrons of the arts. Unofficially, they were the spine of an organization polite people referred to as an association when they did not want trouble. Their businesses stayed clean enough to pass audits and dirty enough to make auditors retire early. The invitation said my restored 19th century wedding coat had been selected for display at the foundation's spring gala. It also said I was invited as an honored artisan. It did not say that honored artisans were expected to stand under lights while wealthy people praised poverty as authenticity, but I could read between lines. I planned to go, smile until my cheeks hurt, secure 3 new clients, and return to my studio before midnight with at least one stolen pastry in my pocket for Nari. What I did not plan was to reject Han Tae-oh in public. I had seen him in photographs before the gala. It was difficult not to. Han Tae-oh appeared in business pages with a clean jaw, severe suits, and the expression of a man calculating the weight of every object in the room. He was 34, an alpha, CEO of Seonghwa Holdings, and the only son of Han Jin-mook, whose reputation could make a room lower its voice. In photographs, Tae-oh looked colder than glass. In person, he looked worse, because glass at least reflected light. He seemed to absorb it, standing near the entrance of the hotel ballroom in a dark suit with no visible effort, while men twice his age tilted toward him as if gravity had made a private arrangement. I arrived in my best black coat, which had been brushed so many times that it probably felt harassed, and a white shirt Nari had ironed because she did not trust me near heat when nervous. Hyerin came as my guest, wearing a jade jacket she had painted herself. We had agreed she would stop me from speaking too honestly, and I would stop her from stealing decorative fruit. We both failed within an hour. The ballroom smelled of lilies, polished wood, and expensive restraint. My restored wedding coat stood inside a glass case near the stage, lit from above. It had belonged to a merchant's daughter from Jeonju, according to the family that owned it, and had been stored badly for decades in a cedar chest with camphor blocks and grief. When it came to me, one sleeve had nearly separated at the seam, the gold thread had blackened, and a tea stain spread across the front like an old bruise. I had spent 73 hours on it, seeing it upright under museum lighting, no longer collapsing into itself. I felt a private satisfaction too small to show and too large to dismiss. "Look at you," Hyerin whispered. "Cultural heritage with unpaid electricity. Please don't put that on my business card." We were examining the canapes with suspicion when a woman in a pearl gray suit approached, followed by a man carrying a tablet. "Seo Min-jae? "Yes." "I'm Director Chai from the foundation. Han Tae-oh would like to thank you personally for your work." Hyerin's elbow found my ribs before I could say anything unfortunate. I turned and saw Tae-oh walking toward us. Up close, he was not handsome in the friendly way people praised at weddings. His face was composed, almost austere, with dark eyes that moved once over me and seemed to retain every detail. He bowed the exact amount required by courtesy and no more. Seo Min-jae, he said. His voice was low and even. Your restoration was precise. Praise from certain people arrives less like a compliment than an inspection result. Thank you, I said. The garment made it easy. It wanted to survive. One of his eyebrows moved a fraction. Hyerin later claimed this counted as emotional excess. Objects don't want things. People say that before they ruin them. Director Che made a small sound that could have been a laugh or a warning. Tae-oh looked at the wedding coat, then back at me. You speak as if textiles have memories. They do. They remember sweat, weather, storage, weddings, funerals, careless hands. My job is to listen without inventing too much. That is useful, he said. For wedding coats? For contracts? I should have recognized the trap then. Instead, I smiled politely because I was surrounded by donors and my rent had teeth. I repair cloth, Han Tae-oh. I try not to repair contracts. They bleed differently. Hyerin coughed into her champagne. The formal program began 20 minutes later. There were speeches about preservation, legacy, cultural duty, the elegance of continuity, all the phrases wealthy families use when they want their names attached to old beauty. I stood near the stage with other artisans while cameras clicked. Tae-oh gave the final remarks. He was a controlled speaker, precise and almost unpleasantly calm. He thanked donors, scholars, conservators, staff. Then he turned slightly toward where I stood. Some restoration work is not visible from a distance, he said. It requires the patience to hold damage close without making a performance of rescue. Seo Min-jae's work on the Jeonju wedding coat reminded me of that. The audience turned. My ears warmed. Being praised in public always made me feel as if someone had opened a curtain while I was folding laundry. Tae-oh continued. The foundation intends to support independent artisans more directly this year. In fact, I would like to invite Seo Min-jae to discuss a more permanent relationship with Seonghwa. Permanent relationship. The phrase landed oddly. A few people murmured, then smiled with the hungry delight of those who believe they have understood gossip before anyone else. Director Chai's face went still. Near the front, Han Jin-mook watched his son with a faint smile. Beside him sat a young alpha in a cream suit I later learned was Lee Won-ik, heir to a rival alliance family, whose expression was pleasant and sharp. Tae-oh's eyes found mine across the small distance. If he is willing. There are moments when dignity becomes less a virtue than a reflex. I knew in a practical part of my mind that he probably meant a professional arrangement. I also knew every gaze in that ballroom had already converted the phrase into something else. Patronage, possession, a powerful alpha selecting an omega artisan under glass lights and ancestral silk. I had spent years keeping my life from becoming collateral in other people's transactions. I was tired, underpaid, afraid of my phone when unknown numbers called, and still not for display. I stepped closer to the microphone before my caution caught me by the sleeve. I'm grateful for the Foundation's interest, I said. My voice sounded steadier than my hands felt. But I don't accept permanent relationships when I haven't read the terms, especially not in public. A laugh moved through the room, uncertain at first, then louder. Tae-oh did not move. His father's smile thinned. Lee Won-ik lowered his eyes as if hiding amusement. Hyerin, somewhere behind me, whispered something that sounded like a prayer and an insult. I should have stopped there. Naturally, I did not. And as a general rule, I added, I prefer flowers to proposals I did not ask for. The room went very quiet. Tae-oh looked at me for 3 measured seconds. Then he bowed his head once. A sensible preference. He finished the program without visible change. I spent the rest of the evening pretending my life had not just slipped on polished marble. By the time Hyerin dragged me to a taxi, my phone had 6 messages from unknown numbers, 3 from clients asking whether I had offended Seonghwa, and 1 from Nari that said only, "Did you publicly reject a mafia CEO, or is the internet lying?" I texted back, "Both, maybe." The next morning, no flowers arrived. A courier in a black coat came at 9:15 with a flat leather document case and asked for my signature. Hyerin, who had slept on my studio floor because she wanted to witness the aftermath, opened one eye from under a quilt and said, "If that's a severed hand, I refuse to be emotionally available." "It is probably a lawsuit," I said. "It could be flowers." "It's a document case. Rich people have terrible vases." Inside was a contract, not a cease and desist, not an apology, not a patronage agreement. A marriage contract, drafted with terrifying neatness between Han Tae-oh and Seo Min-jae. A note lay on top, handwritten in black ink. "You were correct. Terms should be read in private." No flowers. I sat down slowly. Hyerin crawled over, took one look, and said, "I need coffee before organized crime becomes romantic." It is not romantic. That is exactly what organized crime would say. The contract was 38 pages long, not including appendices. It proposed a legal marriage of 18 months, public cohabitation, limited appearances at family and business events, separate private rooms, no obligation of sexual intimacy, mutual non-disclosure regarding family matters, strict physical boundaries, financial compensation disguised as consulting fees, debt settlement through legal channels, security for me and my immediate family, and an exit clause after the Seonghwa Succession Council finalized control of several holding companies. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was also more respectful than most real proposals I had seen, which says less about Han Tae-oh than about marriage as an institution. I read the first 5 pages twice. Hyerin made coffee so strong it could have interrogated suspects. At 10, my phone rang from a number I recognized with dread, the private lending office that had bought my father's debt. "Seo Min-jae, said Manager Go, who always sounded as if he were smiling at a funeral. "Your grace period has ended. We made a partial payment last week. Interest accumulates. Also, your sister's tuition account was listed as reachable under the guarantor documents." My hand tightened around the phone. "That document was never explained to her. Your father signed. My father was on medication. A court can decide that. Courts take time. Universities do not." He continued speaking, soft and patient. I watched sunlight fall across the marriage contract and hated the fact that desperation can make paper look like a door. At noon, a second envelope arrived. This one contained a copy of my father's loan agreement with several sections highlighted, and a business card from Oh Yun-suk, attorney at Daeyang Legal. On the back, another note in the same controlled handwriting said, "She does not work for me. Ask her before you decide anything." That annoyed me more than if he had tried to corner me. I dislike being managed, but I dislike useful management that respects my intelligence even more, because refusing it requires creativity. Attorney O was in her 60s with cropped gray hair and glasses on a chain. She met me the next day in a cafe near City Hall and read the contract while making small marks in the margin. "Han Tae-oh sent you?" "He sent your card." "I owe his mother a favor. His father, nothing. Him, less than he thinks." She turned a page. "This is surprisingly careful." "Meaning?" "Meaning he wants something badly enough not to be stupid." "Comforting." "You should not sign yet. Several clauses are too broad. The security appendix gives his people too much access to your schedule. The non-disclosure could trap you if they commit a crime in front of you, though the wording tries to avoid that. Compensation should be independent of marital status. Debt settlement must be irrevocable. Your sister must be protected even if you divorce him on day 3. I stared at her. You think I should negotiate? I think if you are considering selling your piece, you should at least set the price yourself. I don't want to sell anything. No one does at first. She said it without pity, which made it bearable. I told her about Nari, the debt, the threats disguised as phone calls, the studio lease, the way every month ended with arithmetic and shame. Attorney Oh listened. When I finished, she folded her hands. Han Tae-oh's reason is likely succession, she said. His grandfather's private charter required the heir to be married before assuming full control of certain foundation assets and trust votes. Old men enjoy controlling people from graves. There is also pressure for him to marry Lee Won-ik, which would bind Seonghwa to the Lee family's distribution network. That family holds several debts in gray areas, possibly yours. The cafe noise seemed to pull away from me. So he wants me because I embarrassed him publicly? He wants you because you cannot be mistaken for his family's chosen pawn. Your rejection made you look independent. If you marry him after that, the story becomes that he pursued you and won you despite humiliation. It weakens the argument that he is being forced into Lee Won-ik's alliance. That's ridiculous. Yes. People will believe it? People believe narratives that protect their investments. I rubbed my forehead. So I'm useful because I looked impossible to buy. Attorney Oh's expression softened by 1 degree. Only if you let him buy you badly. I met Han Tae-oh 3 days later in a private conference room above a restaurant with no sign on the street. I brought Attorney Oh, who had marked the contract so thoroughly it looked injured. Tae-oh brought Director Chai, a silent man named Magi Seok, and 2 revised copies. He stood when we entered, suit charcoal instead of black, face composed enough to make the room feel audited. I opened my notebook before the tea cooled. My sister's tuition and debt protection had to survive any divorce. My studio had to remain mine, with no hidden Seonghwa ownership or foundation takeover. Security could advise me, not command me. I would not have men in suits following me through fabric markets like I was a smuggled vase. My room would lock from my side. No one would enter without permission except for fire, medical emergency, or actual crime. Public touch had to be agreed before each event, not improvised because cameras appeared. He disagreed only when I tried to define every ordinary situation myself. And for 20 irritating minutes, we carved the word ordinary into categories: work, grocery shopping, visits with Nari, family council properties, unknown vehicles near the studio, public events. He did not dismiss my objections. He reduced them, named their risks, and returned with alternatives. It was like arguing with a man who sharpened knives for relaxation. His own conditions were fewer and heavier: 5 nights a week at his residence for 6 months, attendance at several family and foundation events, no public contradiction of the marriage narrative unless safety required it, disclosure of threats or gifts connected to his family, no private meetings with Lee Won-ik, and a background audit because his enemies would search my finances first. Your enemies, I corrected. If you sign, some of them become yours, he said, watching steam rise from his cup instead of watching me. I disliked how practical that was. So did he. I signed 8 days later after Manager Go's office sent a letter to Nari's university claiming a pending garnishment review. Nari found out before I could hide it. She arrived at my studio pale with rage, the letter crushed in one fist. "What did you do?" she demanded. "Which part? Don't joke." I am not joking. There are several answers, and none of them are good. When I told her, she did not cry. Nari rarely cried when something deserved tears. She stood very straight in the middle of my workroom, surrounded by silk, thread, and other people's ceremonial happiness, and looked at me as if I had betrayed her by protecting her. "You can't marry him for my tuition." "I am marrying him for several horrible reasons. You are only one." "That doesn't help." "It was not designed to. He is Han Tae-oh." I noticed. "Hyung." The word slipped out, cracked at the edge. "You told me no one gets to use us because we are desperate." "I know. And sometimes desperation becomes a room with no windows. I am negotiating a door." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, angry at the tear before it fully formed. "I don't want a future bought by you standing next to him." "Then become a lawyer who makes contracts like this unnecessary." "That's unfair." "Yes." She sat down hard on the client chair. We stayed that way for a while, two siblings losing an argument to the world. At last she said, "I want to read it." "You'll hate it." "I already hate it. I want to hate it accurately." So Nari read the contract with Attorney Oh line by line and found 3 more clauses to change because my sister believed fear should be footnoted. Han Tae-oh accepted 2 and rewrote the 3rd. When he arrived at Attorney Oh's office for final signing, Nari was there in her university sweatshirt with her hair tied back, looking young and fierce and exhausted. "If you harm him," she said to Tae-oh before anyone sat down, "I will become the kind of lawyer who ruins your sleep." Tae-oh bowed to her. "Then I hope your studies go well." She blinked, thrown off by the lack of condescension. "They will. I'll have the legal fund documents sent to you directly. I didn't ask you for money." "No, you asked for leverage." Nari looked at me with open dislike for the fact that he had understood her. I sympathized. The legal marriage took place on a rainy Tuesday morning at a district office with Attorney Oh, Director Che, and Heirin as witnesses. Heirin wore red lipstick because, in her words, someone needed to look alive. Tae-oh wore a dark suit. I wore my repaired black coat, and the clerk processed our paperwork with the bored efficiency of a person who had seen every possible human arrangement reduced to stamps. "Congratulations," the clerk said. "Thank you," Tae-oh replied. I said, "Is there a receipt?" Heirin made a strangled noise. Tae-oh glanced at me. "For the marriage?" "For tax purposes." The clerk did not laugh. Director Che did. It was quick and startled and vanished when Tae-oh looked at her, but I heard it. Afterward, instead of a wedding meal, we went to Attorney Oh's office to sign the final side agreements. Instead of flowers, Tae-oh handed me a key card and a slim black phone. "No," I said. "It is encrypted. My current phone can also receive insults and weather alerts. Your current phone is compromised. By poverty, not espionage. Manager Go's office used a tracking link in a text message yesterday. You opened it at 7:42 p.m. I stared at him. "How do you know that?" His face did not change. "Because my staff checked after you agreed to security." I agreed to security, not a magician in my pocket. Tae-oh placed the phone on the table and pushed it toward me with 2 fingers. "Use both if you like. Keep this for anything connected to me." This is exactly the kind of thing that makes people write anonymous posts about controlling husbands. If you write one, don't use your current phone. Heirin laughed so hard she had to leave the room. I moved into his house that evening. Calling it a house felt dishonest. It was a walled residence on a quiet street in Seongbuk-dong, with old pine trees, security cameras disguised as lights, and a front gate that opened as if it had judged you and found you temporarily acceptable. Inside, the rooms were modern without comfort, expensive without personality. Stone floors, low furniture, art selected by someone with money and no fingerprints. The only room that looked lived in was a small study overlooking the garden, where stacks of documents sat in precise piles beside a single chipped ceramic cup. A housekeeper named Mrs. Yang showed me to my room. She was in her 50s, beta, with kind eyes and the practical authority of someone who had outlived several employers' moods. The room was larger than my entire apartment. It had a bed, desk, wardrobe, private bath, and a window facing a ginkgo tree. On the desk sat a humidity meter identical to the one in my studio. I stared at it. Mrs. Yang followed my gaze. "Han Sajang-nim said you work with old fabric." "He said that?" "He said old fabric suffers in dry rooms." A very small irritation opened in me because he was correct, and I had not asked him to be. My first week as Han Tae-oh's husband was less romantic than a dental procedure and only slightly less scheduled. Director Chai provided a calendar in 3 colors: public obligations, private obligations, and avoid unless necessary. Ma Gi-seok, who turned out to be head of security, explained routes, drivers, safe rooms, emergency codes, and why I should not accept packages from unknown couriers. Mrs. Yang explained the kitchen, laundry, staff hours, and which cabinet contained snacks, because, she said, men in this family think meals happen because someone writes them on paper. Tae-oh explained almost nothing. He left before dawn, returned after midnight, and communicated through short messages. Dinner with my father, Thursday 1900. Dark suit recommended. No need to speak unless addressed. I replied, I usually speak when addressed and occasionally when not. His answer came 2 minutes later. Noted. On the 4th night, I found him in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, standing before the open refrigerator as if negotiating with it. He had removed his jacket. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the forearm. The sight startled me because it made him look less like an institution and more like an exhausted man failing at food. "Does the refrigerator owe you money?" I asked. He looked at me. "Mrs. Yang left soup." "It's in the blue pot." He glanced at 3 identical stainless steel pots. "That one," I said, pointing. "Blue tape on the handle." He took it out. "You know the kitchen." I eat. "Mrs. Yang said you skipped dinner." "Mrs. Yang has chosen a side early." "Did you?" "Skip dinner?" "Choose a side." The question was too direct for the hour. I opened the cabinet, found crackers, and put them on the counter. I chose terms. Sides require trust. He absorbed that without offense. "Fair. You should heat the soup in a smaller pan unless you enjoy washing unnecessary dishes." "I don't wash dishes." "That explains your confidence." He looked at the pot in his hand, then at the sink, and for a moment I saw him confronted by a domestic reality no one had briefed him on. I took pity on him, which was my first mistake. I heated the soup. He watched as if I were performing a specialized procedure. "You've never reheated soup?" "I have staff." Tragic. A whole childhood lost. My childhood had other priorities. The answer came flat, not wounded, and ended the joking more effectively than a door closing. I handed him a bowl. He accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," he said. It was the first ordinary thing he had said to me without making it sound like policy. At the family recognition dinner, Han Jin-mook received us in a private room at a traditional restaurant, with Tae-oh's aunt Han Mi-ran on one side and Lee Won-ik on the other. Jin-mook had the calm of a man who preferred contracts because knives left evidence. He called me the Omega who had rejected his son before cameras. Tae-oh corrected him without raising his voice, the artisan who was now his husband. Dinner became a polite examination. Where was my family from? How long had I run my studio? Would I continue working now that my circumstances had improved? Lee Won-ik asked that last question with a smile sharpened to a ceremonial edge. "My circumstances are legally complicated, not improved," I said. And yes, I will work. Some spouses prefer to support from inside the household, he replied. Some garments also prefer to remain in boxes, I said. It does not mean they are preserved. Mi-ran laughed softly. Tae-oh did not look at me, but he said, I expected him to be sharp. In that room where every courtesy had teeth, being expected felt oddly useful. After dinner, Jin Mook asked to speak with Tae-oh alone, and Lee Won-ik joined me in the hallway with 2 cups of tea I did not take. He told me I should ask Tae-oh why his first engagement failed. When Tae-oh returned, his gaze moved from the tea to Lee Won-ik's pleasant face. Don't offer my husband anything he did not ask for, he said. In the car home, I demanded the missing history. Tae-oh told me there had been an arranged engagement when he was 26 to Yoon Seo-yeon from a shipping family. It ended after his mother died because his father tried to use the woman's brother's gambling debt to force better terms. And you let her leave? I asked. Yes, he said. Did it cost you? Yes, he offered no decoration, but I heard the change in his voice when he mentioned his mother. Next time, I said, tell me before someone else does. He agreed. 2 days later, I discovered that security had been entering my studio before I arrived to inspect packages. I discovered this because my thread cabinet, which I organized by dye family and personal superstition, had been rearranged by a person with no soul. I stood in the middle of the studio at 8 in the morning, holding a spool of indigo silk that had been placed among the blacks, and called Tae-oh. He answered on the 2nd ring. Is there a threat? Yes. What happened? Someone committed violence against my thread cabinet. A pause. Explain. I explained with enough precision to make an archivist proud and a security professional despair. He listened without interruption. The team was checking for tampered packages, he said when I finished. They can check packages without touching every drawer like raccoons with badges. I'll speak to them. That is not enough. What do you want? A written boundary. No one opens storage drawers without me present. If they need to inspect a package, they put it on the front table and wait. If that creates risk, they call me. If they dislike waiting, they can restore a Qing dynasty sleeve with sweaty hands and see how risk feels. Another pause. Then, send me your preferred procedure. I already did, verbally. Written procedures reduce interpretation. I hate when you make sense. Noted. By noon, Ma-gi Seok arrived at the studio with an apology, a revised inspection protocol, and a new front table with a lockable lower shelf. He stood stiffly among my fabrics, looking like a wolf sent to etiquette class. I did not understand the organization system, he said. You don't say. His ears reddened. Han Sajang-nim said the drawers are your archive, not storage. That distinction mattered. I wished it did not matter that Tae-oh had made it. I signed the revised protocol, then showed Ma which packages could be moved and which could not. He listened seriously. Before leaving, he looked at a torn children's joggery on my work table. Hyerin visited the house in late April after making me swear there were no trapdoors. Mrs. Yang served tea in the sunroom while my friend looked around at the stone floor, garden wall, and silent security beyond the glass. This place has the emotional temperature of a bank vault, she said. Be kind, I told her. The fern is trying. Then she asked whether I was safe, and the joke left both of us. Physically, I said. She heard the missing half. Her own trouble had not paused for my marriage. Her mother wanted her to reject the Busan residency, and Hye-rin was angry because wanting freedom made her feel like a bad daughter. I told her staying would not cure guilt. It would only teach guilt to collect rent. A week earlier, Tae-oh had placed a municipal caregiver grant notice beside my tea because, he said, my friend qualified and I worried about her. I gave heir the notice without naming him. She recognized the smell of rich people anyway, applied after 3 evenings of drafts, 2 fights with her mother, and 1 legal review by Nari, then cried in my bathroom for 4 minutes and blamed the soap. In May, anonymous accounts began posting about my father's debt, my sister's university, and the money Seonghwa had used to settle the first pressure against us. The story had been silly when it was about a proud Omega making a cold heir chase him after public rejection. It became uglier once strangers arranged my life into evidence. Tae-oh wanted to crush the rumors loudly. Attorney Oh advised a quieter knife. By evening, Ma traced the first account to a media contractor tied to Lee Won-ik's family. Not enough for court, but enough to know where the smoke came from. We chose restraint, legal action against the lender, removal of Nari's name from the forged guarantor claim, proof that the foundation's artisan grant program existed before me, and no romantic performance for gossip. It was sensible and unsatisfying, which is how I knew it might work. 2 nights later, I returned from the studio to find a low cabinet had been placed in the sunroom. Inside were archival boxes, acid-free tissue, and humidity controls. My hands went still on the handle. Tae-oh came in behind me. Your studio lock was damaged yesterday. I know. Ma thinks it was a warning. I know that too. Until it is replaced, anything irreplaceable can be stored here. Anything irreplaceable? Work materials, family documents, personal items. I am not moving my life into your house. I did not ask you to. You bought an archive cabinet. I purchased equipment. For my life. For the items that would be difficult to replace if Lee Won-ik's people become less subtle. I turned to face him. This is the problem with you. You do something useful in the most alarming way possible. His brow moved slightly. What would have been less alarming? Asking. He looked at the cabinet, then at me. May I provide temporary archive storage in the sunroom until your studio lock is replaced? I hated that the question, late as it was, softened my anger. You may provide temporary archive storage. You may not decide what enters it. Agreed. And you may not call my old receipts irreplaceable. Some records matter. They are tax records. To prison, perhaps. I stared at him. A corner of his mouth changed, not a smile. Evidence of one, maybe. It disappeared almost at once, but I had seen it, and seeing it felt like finding a stitch in the wrong color on a formal sleeve. Small, human, impossible to unsee. The emotional turn did not come from one grand wound. It arrived through several things gathering weight. Herein received the caregiver grant and was furious because relief embarrassed her. Nari won a small procedural motion against the lender and celebrated by falling asleep at my studio table on top of her notes. Tae-oh had Ma drive her home and did not tell me until after because she threatened to bite anyone who treated her like cargo. Mrs. Yang began leaving an extra bowl of rice for me without comment. Director Chai admitted she had once planned to leave Seonghwa, but stayed because Tae-oh had transferred her abusive supervisor to a branch office so remote, she said, even ghosts filed complaints. Then came the music room. I found it by accident during a storm. The power flickered, the hallway lights reset, and one panel near the east wing failed to close fully. I was carrying a flashlight because Mrs. Yang disliked storms, and I had been checking whether the kitchen windows leaked. The narrow room beyond the panel smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Inside stood a piano covered by a cloth, shelves of old records, a framed photograph turned face down, and a cabinet of stage costumes wrapped in muslin. I should have left. I knew that. Privacy was not only a clause when it belonged to me. but the muslin had loosened on one sleeve, and instinct moved before ethics. I stepped inside to retie it. The garment beneath was a blue performance dress, not hanbok, with beadwork along the collar. The fabric had been stored carefully but not professionally. A seam near the shoulder had begun to strain. I touched it with the back of my finger, not enough to disturb, only enough to learn. Singer's costume, maybe. Someone had worn it under hot lights and lifted one arm often. The stress told a history. "Don't touch that!" Tae-oh's voice came from the doorway. I turned so quickly the flashlight beam struck the ceiling. "I apologize," I said. "The panel was open. The sleeve was loose. I should have left." He stood very still. Rain tapped hard against the windows somewhere behind him. The flashlight made half his face visible and left the other half in shadow, which was too theatrical for a man who disliked performance. "It was my mother's," he said. I lowered my hand. "I didn't know." "No. I didn't damage it." "I know." The words came too quickly, as if he had stopped himself from saying something harsher. He stepped into the room and turned the photograph upright. It showed a woman on a stage laughing with her head turned towards someone outside the frame. She had Tae-oh's eyes, but none of his guarded economy. Her mouth was open mid-song or mid-laughter, alive in a way photographs rarely manage. "She was a singer?" I asked. "Before my father married her. That before held a room of its own." Tae-oh touched the piano cloth, then withdrew his hand without lifting it. He liked that people admired her. He disliked that she enjoyed being admired. I said nothing. Some statements require a witness, not a reply. "He kept her costumes here after she died," Tae-oh continued. "Not in her apartment. Not with her sister. Here, like confiscated evidence." His voice did not break. That almost made it worse. He had spent years building a way of speaking that allowed pain to pass through without leaving visible marks. I thought of the way he had accepted my boundary at the contract table, the way he corrected his father at dinner, the way he asked permission only after getting it wrong. Not kindness as charm, restraint as inheritance fought by hand. "Do you want them preserved?" I asked. He looked at me then. The room was dim, and still I saw the question land somewhere unprotected. "Yes," he said. "I can recommend someone. I trust your work. My work, or me?" He did not answer immediately. Outside, thunder moved over the hill. "Both," he said at last, and the words sounded as if it had cost him more than money. I did not sleep well that night. Trust is dangerous when it arrives without ceremony. I lay in my room listening to rain and told myself gratitude was not affection, shared grief was not intimacy, and being seen by someone did not obligate me to stand closer. All of that was true. It was also incomplete. The difficulty was no longer that Tae-oh had selected me for strategic reasons. The difficulty was that strategy had placed us near enough to notice what neither of us would have offered freely. I began restoring his mother's costume in June. We moved it to the sunroom cabinet with written permission, photographs, condition reports, and more care than some hospitals give living people. Tae-oh never hovered. He asked for updates once a week, standing 2 steps away from the work table, hands behind his back. At first he spoke only about the garment. Later he told me her stage name, Yoon Hae-sol. Later still he brought a record from the music room and placed it beside the cabinet. "She recorded this before marriage," he said. "Do you listen to it?" "No." "Do you want to?" "No," I nodded. "Do you want me to keep it here anyway?" "Yes." We did not play it. The record sat between us like a sealed letter. Hyerin noticed the change before I admitted it. She came to the studio one afternoon, waving the acceptance letter from Busan with one hand and holding iced coffee with the other. She was leaving in August. Her mother had agreed to hire 2 part-time workers with the caregiver grant. though she had called it a government nuisance and complained for 40 minutes. "I'm proud of you," I said. "Don't be tender. I'll panic." "Fine. Your essay was melodramatic but effective." "Thank you." She examined my face. "Oh, no." "What?" "You like him." "I like several people. Mrs. Yang, Attorney Oh, the walnut cake woman downstairs." "You like your husband." "I respect aspects of his conduct under stress." That is the ugliest sentence anyone has used for desire. "Don't say desire in my studio. The silk is old-fashioned." She set the coffees down. "Are you afraid because of him or because of you?" The question found its mark with irritating accuracy. I picked up my scissors, then put them down because answering while holding blades seemed unfair. "I am afraid because if I feel something real while the contract still holds the roof up, I won't know whether it belongs to me." Hyren's expression changed. She stopped teasing. "Then make sure you can leave." "I know." "Do you?" "Yes." "No, you know how to endure. Leaving is a different skill." That night I asked Tae-oh to revise the contract. We were in the study. He had come home before 10 for once, and I had brought the matter like a document, because documents were the language we had both trusted before we trusted anything else. "I want the protections separated completely," I said. "Not just Nari's tuition, the debt settlement, studio relocation guarantee, legal defense, all of it. If I leave tomorrow, they remain." He closed the file he had been reading. "What happened?" "Nothing." "That is rarely when people request major revisions." "I need to know the door opens." His face became very still. "Do you intend to use it?" "I don't know." It was the first answer that felt entirely honest. He looked down at his hands. The injured wrist had healed, but he still moved it carefully when tired. "I thought the current terms were sufficient," he said. "They were sufficient when I disliked you more neatly." His eyes lifted. I regretted the sentence and didn't regret it. This arrangement is changing. That makes the original imbalance worse, not better. I can't continue unless I know my safety isn't payment for staying. He stood and walked to the window. In the garden, path lights glowed among wet leaves. For several seconds, I thought he would argue. Instead, he said, "Attorney Oh can draft it tomorrow." Relief hurt. "You agree?" "Yes." "Without conditions?" "One." I stiffened. He turned back. "If you leave because of a threat, tell me. You don't have to return, but don't disappear into danger to prove independence." It was such a specific request that my throat tightened. "That sounds reasonable." "It is." "Suspicious." "Probably." Attorney Oh drafted the revisions. Tae-oh signed them before I did. He also transferred the legal fund into an independent trust controlled by Attorney Oh and Nari as secondary reviewer, which made my sister stare at the documents for a long time. "He gave up leverage," she said. "He still has other leverage." "Yes, but he gave up this one." She looked at me across Attorney Oh's desk. "Do you want me to tell you to leave?" "No." "Do you want me to tell you to stay?" "No." "Good. I was going to refuse both." She tapped the paper. "Now, whatever you do is yours. Don't waste that by pretending you don't know what you want. Younger sisters are a punishment disguised as family." The final pressure came in July, on a morning so humid the city seemed wrapped in wet cloth. The succession council would meet in 2 weeks. Lee Won-ik's side filed a formal challenge claiming our marriage was fraudulent, financially coercive, and damaging to Seonghwa's public legitimacy. Attached were copies of my father's debt papers, my studio lease, and a private message I had sent Hye-rin the night after the gala saying, "If flowers arrive from him, bury me under them, because I cannot survive the humiliation." Hyerin apologized 12 times, even though her phone had been compromised through a gallery Wi-Fi network, which offended her almost as much as the betrayal. The challenge demanded that I appear before the council and answer questions about the marriage. Han Jin-mook supported the demand with grave concern for tradition, which meant he had helped write it. Tae-oh refused. "If you refuse," Director Chai said, "they argue you are hiding him. If he appears, they attack him. If he appears willingly and well-prepared, it may end the challenge." Tae-oh's eyes were cold enough to make the room straighten. "He is not a witness for my family to carve." I was standing by the bookshelf, reading the filing. My own life had been arranged in exhibits: debt, rent, tuition, private jokes. Evidence has a way of making intimacy look like crime. "I'll go," I said. "No," Tae-oh replied immediately. I looked at him. "You don't get to spend months telling people I'm your husband and then decide I'm furniture when the room becomes unpleasant. This is not about pride. Mine is. They will ask degrading questions. I have answered debt collectors with fever and hemmed a gown while a bride's mother explained Omega obedience to me for 40 minutes. I have experience." Director Che looked at the table. Tae-oh stepped closer, then stopped before the movement became crowding. "Min-jae." He used my name rarely. It changed the air. "I separated the protections because you asked to be free," he said. "I won't let the council turn that freedom into another obligation." "You are not letting them." "I am deciding." I held up the filing. "Also, some of these documents are forged." Everyone turned. I placed the loan agreement on the desk beside the copy Attorney O had obtained months earlier. "This version has my father's signature, yes, but the guarantor addendum with Nari's tuition account was inserted later. The paper aging is inconsistent. The fold marks don't align. The ink feathering on the account number differs from the body text. I restore documents, Tae-oh. Did everyone forget that paper is literally my job?" Magi-seok leaned in. Attorney O called immediately, asked for scans. By evening, she confirmed what I had seen. The addendum was likely fabricated after my father's death to expand leverage. The lender had been sloppy because desperate families rarely bring archivists to debt fights. The council hearing took place in a private room at Seonghwa's old headquarters, a low stone building that looked more like a museum than a place where men ruined one another politely. I wore a navy suit I had paid for myself. Tae-oh offered a driver. I accepted. He offered to sit beside me. I declined. "I will stand better if you are not close enough to rescue me from discomfort," I said in the car. "I dislike that." "I know. I will be across the room." "I know that too." Han Jin-mook presided from the center of a long table. Miran sat to his left. Lee Won-ik sat with his legal counsel, pleasant as ever. Several elders and shareholders watched with expressions of cultivated concern. Tae-oh stood near the windows, not at the table, hands at his sides. When I entered, his gaze met mine briefly, then moved away. He gave me exactly what I had asked for. No performance of protection, no claim placed over my shoulders. Just presence. They asked whether I had loved him before marriage. I said no. They asked whether I had received financial benefit. I said yes, and explained the terms. A few faces tightened. Honesty is inconvenient when people expect shame. Lee Won-ik's counsel asked, "So you admit this union began as an exchange?" "Most marriages do," I said. "Some exchange family approval, some exchange property, some exchange loneliness for habit. Ours had clearer paperwork." A low murmur moved around the table. Tae-oh looked down. I suspected dangerously that he was hiding amusement. "Did Han Tae-oh coerce you?" the counsel asked. "No." "Did desperation influence your consent?" "Of course." "Then how can you call it consent?" I folded my hands. Because desperation limited my options, not my mind. That is why I negotiated. That is why I had counsel. That is why the protections were revised so I can leave without losing what was promised. If you are concerned about coercion, you should investigate the forged debt documents used against my sister, rather than the contract that removed their threat. Attorney Oh presented the paper analysis. Na-ri, permitted as a legal observer, sat behind me with her jaw clenched hard enough to crack walnuts. Heerin had sent a message that morning saying, "Step on them verbally." I tried to honor her within legal limits. When Lee Won-ik realized the forged addendum would be entered into a formal complaint, his smile finally lost its polish. Han Jin-mook's expression did not change, but Miran leaned back slowly, reassessing the board. Several council members began asking questions of the lender connection instead of our marriage. The room shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Then Tae-oh spoke. "The challenge is withdrawn, or I withdraw my claim to the foundation chair," he said. The table froze. His father turned. "You would abandon your mother's foundation over a contract spouse?" Tae-oh's voice remained even. "Over the council's attempt to use my spouse after being presented with evidence of criminal fraud?" "Yes." "My spouse. Not asset, not husband for effect." The words were plain enough to pass unnoticed by anyone listening for romance, but I heard the decision inside them. "You know what that costs," Jin-mook said. "I know what it costs to stay." That was all. No speech, no plea. A line drawn with no decoration. Miran spoke next, surprising everyone. "The challenge should be tabled pending review of the forgery claim." One elder agreed, then another. Lee Won-ik objected. Director Che distributed additional documents with the calm of a woman who had prepared for 10 disasters and preferred this one. By the end of 2 hours, the challenge had not only failed, the lender's relationship with the Lee family had become the more urgent scandal. Tae-oh's succession vote was postponed, not lost. Han Jin-mook left without looking at either of us. Outside, under a sky the color of unpolished steel, Tae-oh and I stood beside the car without touching. "You shouldn't have offered to withdraw," I said. "Probably not." "That was reckless." "Yes." "Are you going to pretend it was strategic?" "No." I looked at him then. His face was tired, controlled, familiar in a way that unsettled me more than mystery ever had. "Why?" He took a moment. "Because they were using you. That has been true since page 1. At first, I was too." There it was, not an apology wrapped in elegance, a fact with blood under it. I leaned against the car and looked at the wet pavement. Yes. I told myself the terms made it different. They did make it different. Not enough. No. He accepted that. The lack of defense mattered. After a while, he said, "The revised contract is in your room. Signed. If you want dissolution, Attorney Oh can file tomorrow. The protections remain. The debt case continues. Your studio relocation fund remains. Na-ri's trust remains. Nothing changes if you go. Why put it in my room before the hearing? In case I failed to say it afterward." That almost undid me. I had prepared myself for pressure, for persuasion, for the old machinery of obligation. I had not prepared for a man raised among cages quietly leaving the door open and stepping away from it. I did not answer him in the parking lot. Some answers deserve better lighting. For 3 days, I returned to my apartment above the walnut cake shop. The room was smaller than I remembered, and exactly as mine as I needed it to be. Dust had gathered on the windowsill. My kettle whistled too loudly. The architects upstairs still argued about concrete. I worked in the studio, slept badly, ate food from paper containers, and tried to learn what my life sounded like without Tae-oh's house around it. Nari came on the second night with groceries and no patience. Are you leaving him? I am sitting with the possibility. That sounds like something Attorney O would charge for. I am trying not to confuse missing someone with needing them. She put green onions in my refrigerator. Do you need him? No. Good. Do you miss him? I glared at her. She smiled, small and sad. That's an answer. Hyrin came the next morning before leaving for Busan, carrying a duffel bag and wearing shoes she had painted with blue waves. Her mother waited downstairs in a taxi, pretending not to cry by yelling at the driver about the meter. You look awful, Hyrin said. Thank you. You look unemployed. Artistically displaced. She hugged me hard. Don't choose suffering just because it's familiar. Don't choose Busan men with guitars. I make no promises. She pulled back. He gave you the exit? Yes. And you believe it? Yes. Then whatever happens next is not the same story. After she left, the studio felt too quiet. I spent the afternoon repairing a tear in an old wedding veil and thinking about stories that changed because a seam had been opened properly instead of hidden. At 5, I took the record of Yunhai Seoul from the sunroom cabinet. Tae-oh had sent it with Ma along with the costume because he said the restoration notes belonged with the object. He had not asked me to return to the house. He had not sent flowers. I appreciated both. I went back on the 4th day. Tae-oh was in the music room when Mrs. Yang let me in. The panel stood open. The piano cloth had been removed, though the keys remained untouched. He turned when I entered, and for once I saw surprise before he disciplined it. I didn't know you were coming, he said. Good, I wanted to arrive without being scheduled. His gaze moved to the record under my arm. You brought it back. I brought it to play. His face closed slightly. You don't have to. I know. I set the record on the old turntable. My hands were steady because fabric and old objects had taught me that reverence is most useful when practical. The first notes crackled, then a woman's voice filled the room, warm and bright and younger than grief had allowed her to remain. Tae-oh stood beside the piano, one hand resting on its edge. He did not cry. He did not speak. His jaw tightened once. That was all. When the song ended, the needle hissed softly. I am not staying because of the contract, I said. He did not look at me. I know. I am not staying because you protected me. I know. I am not staying because I feel grateful. His hand curled slightly against the piano wood. Min-jae. I am staying tonight, I said, before courage became theater. Tomorrow I will go to the studio. Next week I will help Hyrin move the rest of her supplies. Nari will still insult both of us when necessary. Attorney O will revise whatever needs revising until the paperwork stops looking like a hostage note. I want separate rooms for now. I want my apartment kept. I want no one calling my work a hobby. I want to learn what we are without emergency standing behind us with a stopwatch. He turned then. His expression was difficult to read, but not empty. Never empty, I understood now. Only guarded by habits older than my presence. Yes, he said. That's all? You gave terms. And? I accept them. A laugh escaped me, unsteady but real. You are unbearable. Often. I also want dinner. I came here directly from work and made a large emotional decision on an empty stomach. He moved toward the doorway. Mrs. Yang made soup. Of course she did. That woman is the true heir of Seonghwa. This time he smiled where I could see it. Small, brief, undeniable. We did not transform overnight. That would have insulted both of us. Tae-oh still overplanned when afraid. I still turned jokes into shields when conversations reached tender ground. The succession vote passed in August after the Lee family's lender scandal widened enough to make association inconvenient. Tae-oh took control of the foundation assets and removed 3 board members before breakfast. I reopened my studio with better locks, no Seonghwa sign on the door, and a small notice for a winter workshop funded by the municipal program heir had taught me to trust with suspicion. Nari graduated the following year and sent Tae-oh a message that said, "I still don't like inherited power, but your legal department uses clean citations." He printed it and placed it in his desk as if it were a medal. The marriage contract did not vanish. It became, after many revisions, a thin document about property boundaries, privacy, public duties we both approved, and dissolution procedures neither of us was afraid to name. Beside it, months later, Attorney Oh drafted something else, shorter and far more alarming. A personal agreement we wrote ourselves, not legally binding, mostly domestic. Ask before solving. Eat sitting down twice a week. No security in the studio drawers. No hiding medical appointments. No public declarations without warning. Tea after difficult meetings, unless one of us is too angry, in which case tea after 40 minutes. Flowers allowed only if accompanied by the name of the shop because I like to know who arranged them. On the first cold evening of November, Tae-oh came to my studio, carrying a paper bag from the walnut cake shop and a small bundle wrapped in muslin. He waited while I finished a repair, seated on the client chair that made powerful men look slightly foolish because one leg was shorter than the others. Snow threatened outside but had not committed. "What is that?" I asked, nodding toward the bundle. He placed it on the table. "Your rejected wedding silk." I frowned. "My what?" "You said once that rejected fabric should not be wasted." "I say many things while sleep-deprived." "I asked Mrs. Yang to check the storage drawer at the house. You left this after the gala exhibition transfer." Inside lay a length of pale gold silk from an old bridal jacket, too damaged for formal restoration, still beautiful in places where the threads held. I touched the edge. "I thought it was gone." "No." "Why bring it?" He took a folded paper from his coat. Not a contract, a sketch. Rough, practical, slightly awkward. A cover design for the archive book I had been planning for years and postponing for reasons that sounded like money, but were also fear. He had drawn a rectangle of silk set into the cover, the damaged portion visible, not hidden. "I thought," he said with the careful discomfort of a man offering something no strategy could protect, "you might use what survived." I looked at the sketch, then at him sitting under the weak studio light with snow beginning at last beyond the window. His hands rested on his knees, empty and still. No flowers, no terms, no audience waiting to decide what we meant. I picked up my scissors, cut a clean piece from the old silk, and placed it over the drawing to see how the color would hold. Tae-oh leaned closer, not touching, waiting for permission even in this small thing. I moved the paper so he could see better, and together we watched the torn fabric become part of a new design, the damaged threads catching the light exactly because they had not been made to disappear.